Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into gene drive technology.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
It is. We've got a whole stack of research articles and reports here.
Sounds like a lot to unpack.
There is, but our mission today is to try and understand how this revolutionary gene drive technology, is being governed.
Yeah, gene drives could modify entire ecosystems.
Huge implications.
Huge. And they could cross international borders, too.
Right, they don't care about our made-up lines on a map.
Exactly. So governing them, well, it's critical and really interesting, too.
Absolutely. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, could you give us a quick reminder of what gene drive technology is and why it's so different from anything we've seen before?
Sure. Gene drives use CRISPR-Cas9. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah. It's like gene editing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they use it to change the normal rules of inheritance.
So they can control which genes get passed down?
Precisely. They basically guarantee that a specific gene, the one they're targeting, is passed down to almost all offspring.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And it makes those genes spread incredibly quickly through an entire population. It's been described, as a chain reaction. But for genes,
I like that analogy. And a lot of the sources we're looking at today focus on how gene drives could be used to control mosquito populations, especially the ones that spread diseases like malaria. That seems like it could really be a game changer, right?
oh, absolutely, yeah. It could revolutionize how we approach disease control.
So how would that actually work? What are the different ways we could use gene drives to target those mosquito populations?
Well, there are two main approaches. The first one is called population replacement.
Okay, what's that?
It's where you use gene drives to essentially make the mosquitoes resistant to the disease.
So they can't spread it anymore.
Exactly. So for malaria, for example, we could spread a gene that makes the mosquitoes unable to transmit the parasite.
Wow, that'd be incredible.
Yeah, and then the second approach is population suppression.
And how's that different?
This one aims to reduce, or in some cases, eliminate the entire mosquito population.
Completely wipe them out.
Well, yeah, in theory.
Both approaches sound like they have massive implications, especially for public health.
Yeah, definitely. And the research, particularly for malaria control, is very advanced.
Really? That's promising.
Yeah. There have been successful studies, lab studies so far, with Anopheles stephensi and Anopheles gambiae.
Those are types of mosquitoes, right?
Yeah, they're the main malaria vectors. And these studies have shown how gene drives can spread anti-malarial genes in caged populations.
So in a controlled environment, it works.
Yes, exactly. The next step is seeing if it can work in the real world.
But such a powerful tool, it must raise some serious questions about how we control it.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, how do you govern something that can literally change an entire species?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And one of the biggest challenges right now is that there's no international specific framework for governing gene drives.
So there are no rules specifically for this technology.
Not yet. There are frameworks for genetically modified organisms, GMOs.
Right, I've heard of those.
And some people think we can just adapt those for gene drives.
Okay, so use the existing rules for GMOs to govern gene drives. Does that seem like it would work?
Well, there are some concerns. One worry is that the existing regulations might not be comprehensive enough for gene drives.
What do you mean?
Well, gene drives, they have the potential to impact entire ecosystems.
Right, we're just talking about wiping out entire mosquito populations.
Exactly. And that could have unforeseen consequences.
So we need to think about the bigger picture.
Exactly. Some experts are saying we need stricter environmental risk assessments.
Makes sense. And longer-term monitoring, right? We need to keep an eye on things.
Yes, definitely. Even within the U.S., things are complicated.
How so?
Well, the U.S. uses something called the Coordinated Framework for the Regulation of Biotechnology. It involves the FDA, the USDA, and the EPA. So a lot of different players.
I see. So it's not just one agency that's responsible?
Right. And even then, jurisdiction over gene drive mosquitoes, it could fall under different agencies.
Depending on what?
On their intended use.
So how they're being used, that seems a bit tricky.
It is. For example, if we're using gene drives for, say, population control of mosquitoes, that could be considered a pesticide.
So that would fall under the EPA.
Right. But if it's for disease control, then it might be under the FDA.
I see. So even within one country, there are a lot of different regulations to navigate.
Yes, exactly. And that's just one country. Imagine trying to do this on a global scale.
It sounds like a real challenge.
It is. But it's a challenge we need to address if we want to use this technology safely and responsibly.
Absolutely. So who's working on this at the international level? Who are the key players in gene drive governance?
Well, one of the big players is the UN Environment Program.
UNP, right.
Yes, they're the ones behind the Cartagena Protocol. It's an international agreement on biosafety procedures for GMOs.
So that's already in
Yeah,
place.
been around for a while.
And what about the WHO? They must be involved too, given their focus on global health.
Oh, absolutely. The WHO is heavily involved. They have a program called the Special Program for Research and Training in Tropical Diseases.
That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah, but they often call it TDR for short. And they've developed guidelines for research on genetically modified mosquitoes, including gene drives.
So they're taking this seriously.
Very much so. They recognize both the potential benefits and the risks.
Makes sense. But with so many different organizations and frameworks, it seems like it could be tough to ensure everyone's on the same page.
Oh, definitely is. Coordination is key. We need to make sure everyone is working together.
So how do we do that? How do we ensure a cohesive and effective approach to governing gene drives globally?
Well, one solution that's been proposed is to establish what they're calling governance coordinating committees.
GCCs, what would they do?
That act as kind of a bridge between all the different governing bodies. They'd monitor projects, make sure information is flowing properly, and even help steer research in the right direction.
Steer research. How?
Well, they'd consider things like local concerns and new scientific findings. They could help ensure that research is aligned with what people want and what the science is telling us.
That sounds like a really important role.
It is. It's about making sure everyone has a voice and that decisions are made in a way that benefits everyone.
So GCCs could help streamline things and ensure everyone's working towards the same goal.
Exactly. And they can help build public trust, too, by making sure everything is transparent and accountable.
Transparency and accountability, those seem like really important principles.
Oh, they are. And there's actually a framework that outlines some key principles for good governance.
Really? What's it called?
It's called the TAPIC framework. It stands for transparency, accountability, participation, integrity, and capacity.
That's a lot to remember.
It is, yeah, but it basically covers all the bases for good governance.
So if GCCs were guided by the TAPIC framework, it seems like they could really make a difference in ensuring gene drives are developed and used responsibly.
I think so, too. It's a good starting point anyway.
That's encouraging. It sounds like we're making progress, even though there's still a lot of work to be done.
Oh, definitely. Gene drive governance is an ongoing process. It's going to take time and effort to get it right.
Well, this has been a great overview of the challenges and considerations involved in governing gene drive technology.
Just scratching the surface, really.
It really is a complex topic, but it's also incredibly fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
And incredibly important.
Couldn't agree more.
We're just getting started with our exploration, and in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to look at some specific examples of how gene drive governance is taking shape around the world.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
So we've laid some groundwork, talked about the general concepts.
Big picture.
Right. Now let's dive into some real-world examples.
I like it. Get specific.
Exactly. Remember how we talked about the U.S. regulatory landscape?
All the different agencies.
Yeah, the FDA, USDA, EPA, the whole gang.
Right. It seemed a bit complicated.
Well, it is. And there's been a recent development that's pretty relevant.
Oh, what happened?
The FDA, they put out new guidance on genetically modified mosquitoes.
Okay.
And they clarified which agency is in charge, depending on how the mosquitoes are being used.
So is it for pest control or disease control, that kind of thing?
Exactly. If it's population control, like using gene drives to reduce mosquito numbers, that falls under the EPA.
Because it's considered a pesticide?
Right. But if it's for disease control, like making mosquitoes resistant to malaria, then it stays under the FDA.
Okay, so they're trying to make things clearer.
Yeah, trying to streamline things.
But, I still wonder, are those existing frameworks, the ones made for GMOs, are they really enough for gene drives?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. It's a new technology, maybe needs new rules.
A lot of experts think so. Some are worried that the current regulations, particularly in the U.S., don't really address the potential for, ecological ripple effects.
Yeah, we talked about that. Messing with one species could impact a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. So they're calling for tougher environmental impact assessments.
Makes sense. Look before you leap, right?
Right. And they want longer monitoring periods, too.
So we don't just release these gene drives and forget about them.
Exactly. We need to track them, see what happens in the long term.
See if there are any unintended consequences.
Exactly. Some are even talking about having mechanisms to reverse the effects of a gene drive, if needed.
Wait, reverse a gene drive? Is that even
Well,
possible?
it's still early days, but scientists are working on something called reversal drives.
How would that work?
The idea is to release a second gene drive that basically overwrites the first one, undoes the changes.
Wow, that's incredible. Like an undo button for gene editing?
Kind of, yeah, but it's complex, and it highlights the need for caution.
Totally. We need to be careful, think things through.
Absolutely. And, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, they've been emphasizing this point. Yeah, Nassim. They released a report on responsible gene drive research.
What did they say?
They stressed the need for proactive risk assessment, looking at both the intended and unintended consequences.
So thinking about all the possible outcomes, not just the ones we want.
Exactly. And they also highlighted the importance of open communication and community engagement.
Right, getting the public involved.
Yeah. It's not just a decision for scientists and policymakers to make. It affects everyone.
Absolutely. And speaking of everyone, it's important to remember that gene drive governance isn't just a national issue, it's global.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Gene drives don't respect borders.
So what's happening on the international stage? How are different organizations approaching this?
Well, the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD, is a big player.
I've heard of that. It's a treaty, right?
Yeah, an international treaty. Almost 200 countries have signed it.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and the CBD, their focus is on protecting biodiversity, making sure we use biological resources sustainably.
So how do gene drives fit into that?
Well, they've been having a lot of discussions about gene drives and their potential impacts, both good and bad.
I bet those discussions get pretty heated.
They can, yeah. There's a wide range of viewpoints.
Like what?
Well, some countries want a complete moratorium on releasing gene drive organisms.
Whoa, a total ban.
Yeah, until we understand the risks better. Others are more cautious. They want to start with contained field trials.
So baby steps.
Right. And there are big debates about who gets to approve gene drive releases, how to make sure benefits are shared fairly, and how to prevent misuse.
Sounds complicated.
It is. It's not just science, it's politics, it's ethics, all rolled into one.
A real tangled web.
Yeah,
Well,
it is. But it's a web we need to untangle if we want to use this technology responsibly.
and the WHO is involved in these discussions too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They've been developing guidelines for research on genetically modified mosquitoes. They see the potential for disease control.
Makes sense. It's right up their alley.
Right. And they're working to bring everyone to the table, scientists, policymakers, communities.
Trying to build consensus.
Exactly. They even have a special group, the Vector Control Advisory Group, or VCAG.
What do they do?
They give advice on vector control strategies, including gene drives.
So they're helping to shape the global response to gene drives.
Yeah, they're a key player. But it's not just international organizations. Individual countries are also grappling with this.
Right. They need to figure out their own regulations.
Exactly. And there's a lot of variation in how different countries are approaching this.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, Australia, for example, they're pretty strict.
In what way?
They require thorough risk assessments for any gene drive research, and they really emphasize public engagement and transparency.
So they're being very cautious.
Yeah, they want to be absolutely sure before they move forward with anything.
Makes sense. Any other examples?
India, they're still working on their specific regulations for gene drives. They're trying to figure out how to adapt their existing GMO rules to cover this new technology.
So it's a work in progress?
Definitely. Every country is trying to find its own path, its own balance.
Between the potential benefits and the risks.
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act.
It is. But, we've been talking a lot about the governance, the regulations, all the things we need to be careful about.
Right, making sure we use it responsibly.
Exactly. But let's not forget about the potential benefits.
Oh, yeah, the amazing things gene drives could do.
It's like we're walking this tightrope between caution and optimism.
I like that analogy.
We need to be mindful of the risks, but also excited about the possibilities.
Absolutely. It's a powerful technology.
And our sources talked about applications beyond just public health.
Oh, yeah. Gene drives could revolutionize all sorts of fields.
Like agriculture, for example.
Exactly. Imagine reducing our reliance on pesticides.
Those can be harmful to the environment.
And to human health, too. Gene drives could help us target specific pests.
Without harming beneficial insects.
Precisely. It could make farming more sustainable, safer for everyone.
And what about conservation? I remember reading about some exciting possibilities there.
Yeah, gene drives could be a game changer for conservation. Think about invasive species, the ones that are wiping out native plants and animals.
Like those rats on islands that eat all the bird eggs.
Exactly. A gene drive could target those rats, bring their population down, give the native species a chance to recover.
It sounds almost too good to be true.
It does, doesn't it?
But
But we have to remember the risks. Proceed carefully.
always. Thorough risk assessment, monitoring, all those things we talked about.
Absolutely. We need to make sure we're using this technology for good, not accidentally making things worse.
Right. It's a powerful tool, and we need to use it wisely.
Couldn't agree more. We need to be good stewards of this technology.
Stewards of the planet, really.
Yeah.
Because gene drives, they have the potential to impact all of life on Earth.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
Yeah.
But it also makes this whole conversation, this whole deep dive, incredibly important.
I agree. It's not just about science, it's about our future.
And speaking of the future, we've talked a lot about the technical and regulatory aspects of gene drive governance. But what about the ethical considerations?
Ah, yes, the ethics. That's a whole other layer of complexity.
Right. It's not just about what we can do, but what we should do.
Exactly. And there are some big ethical questions surrounding gene drives.
Like what?
Well, one of the most fundamental concerns is about altering the course of evolution.
Wow, that's a big one.
It is. Some people argue that we're overstepping our bounds by manipulating the genetic makeup of entire species.
Playing God, kind of.
Some might say that, yeah. It raises questions about our role as humans on this planet.
Are we stewards of nature, or are we something else?
Exactly. Gene drive technology forces us to confront those questions.
And those are tough questions.
They are. And there are concerns about equity, too.
What do you mean?
Well, some worry that gene drives could exacerbate existing inequalities.
So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
Kind of, yeah. The concern is that wealthy nations or corporations might benefit the most from this technology, while developing countries or marginalized communities are left behind.
That's a real concern. We need to make sure the benefits are shared fairly.
Absolutely. Justice and equity need to be at the forefront of all this.
And what about the potential for misuse? That's something else we need to think about.
Oh, definitely. Could gene drives be weaponized? Could someone use them to disrupt ecosystems for profit?
Those are scary thoughts.
They are. And they highlight the need for international cooperation, for safeguards to prevent those scenarios.
We need to be proactive, not just reactive.
Exactly. We need to think about the potential downsides, not just the potential benefits.
Right, and have plans in place to deal with those downsides.
Exactly. It's about responsible innovation, taking a holistic approach.
Considering all the angles.
All the angles.
Yeah.
The science, the ethics, the societal implications.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. But it's worth it. Because gene drive technology, it has the potential to change the world.
For better or for worse.
Exactly. And it's up to us to make sure it's for the better.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of gene drive technology. We've covered so much ground, from the science to the governance to the ethics.
They're not done yet.
Right. In our final part, we're going to explore some specific case studies of gene drive projects and how they're being governed in different parts of the world.
Should be interesting to see how all this plays out in practice.
Definitely. So stay with us, folks, for the final part of our deep dive into gene drive technology. We've talked a lot about the big picture of gene drive governance.
The frameworks, the ethics, the global discussions.
Right. But now I'm curious about the nitty-gritty, the practical stuff.
How do we actually make sure these gene drives are developed and used responsibly?
Exactly. What are the nuts and bolts of responsible gene drive governance?
Well, there's this concept called a target product profile.
Target product profile. What's that?
It's actually used a lot in, drug development and vaccine development.
Okay, so how does it apply to gene drives?
It's all about defining the characteristics of what you want to create.
So for a gene drive, what kind of characteristics are we talking about?
Well, let's say we're developing a gene drive to control malaria mosquitoes.
Okay, that's a good example.
The target product profile would outline things like, how effective do we want it to be?
Like, how much do we want it to reduce the mosquito population?
Exactly. And how safe is it for other species? We don't want to harm anything. We're not targeting.
Right, we don't want any unintended consequences.
Exactly. And it even considers social acceptability.
What does that mean?
Does the community support this? Do they have concerns about using gene drives?
So it's not just about the science, it's about the people too.
Exactly. It's about making sure the technology aligns with what people want.
So it's like a blueprint for the ideal gene drive.
Exactly. It helps guide research and development, keeps everyone focused on the same goals.
That makes sense. But you said this target product profile idea can also be applied to governance.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So instead of a product, we're talking about a governance system.
So what would the target product profile for a gene drive governance system look like?
Well, it would outline the key features of a really good system.
Give me some examples.
Transparency, for one. We want a system that's open, where information is easily accessible.
So the public can see what's going on.
Exactly. Accountability is another big one. Who's responsible if something goes wrong?
Right. There needs to be someone to answer for that.
Exactly. And the system needs to be able to adapt
Adapt to what?
to new scientific discoveries, to changing societal values.
So it can't be static. It needs to evolve.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that's flexible, responsive, and always puts safety and responsibility first.
That sounds like a tall order.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's essential if we want to use this technology wisely.
Well said. But even with the best governance system, there's always the possibility of the unexpected.
Oh, absolutely. We can't predict everything.
So how do we prepare for that? How do we deal with the unknowns?
Monitoring is crucial. Once a gene drive is released, we need to track it.
Make sure it's behaving as expected.
Exactly.
Right.
And we need to assess its impact, both on the target population and the whole ecosystem.
So keeping a close eye on things.
Yeah. And being ready to intervene if necessary.
If something goes wrong.
Exactly. We need to have a plan B,
Yeah.
maybe even a plan C.
So what tools do scientists use to monitor gene drives in the wild?
One really powerful tool is environmental DNA analysis, or eDNA.
eDNA, I've heard of that, but I don't really know what it is.
It's basically collecting DNA from the environment.
From the air, the water.
Yeah, from all sorts of places.
Yeah.
Soil, water, even the guts of other animals.
So you can tell if a gene drive organism has been in a certain area?
Exactly. We can track its movements, see where it's spreading.
Wow, that's amazing. Like a genetic fingerprint.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful for monitoring gene drives because they can spread so quickly.
Right, we talked about that chain reaction effect.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
eDNA helps us stay one step ahead.
that's reassuring. But what about predicting how a gene drive will behave in the long term? Can we do that?
Well, we can use computer models to simulate different scenarios.
So like a virtual world for gene drives?
Kind of, yeah. We can test different release strategies, see how the gene drive might spread, and look for potential risks.
So we can try to anticipate any problems before they happen.
Exactly. It's not perfect, but it gives us variable information to work with.
So it helps us make more informed decisions.
Exactly. And when it comes to gene drives, informed decisions are crucial.
Absolutely. But even with all the planning and monitoring, we still can't account for everything.
That's true. There's always a chance of the unexpected.
So what do we do then? Throw up our hands and hope for the best?
No, we have contingency plans. We think about what could go wrong and how we'd respond.
So like a backup plan.
Exactly. What if the gene drive spreads further than we anticipated? What if it has unintended effects on other species?
Okay, so what kind of things would a contingency plan include?
It could involve containing the spread of the gene drive, maybe even trying to reverse its effects.
We talked about reversal drives earlier.
Right. And it could involve compensating affected communities if something goes wrong.
So taking responsibility for any harm that might occur.
Exactly. It's about being prepared, being proactive, and acknowledging that things might not always go according to plan.
It seems like this whole approach to gene drive governance is based on the idea of being cautious.
It is. There's a principle called the precautionary principle.
What's that?
It basically says that if there's uncertainty about the risks, we should err on the side of caution.
Better safe than sorry, right.
Exactly. Especially when we're dealing with something as powerful as gene drives.
We're talking about altering the course of evolution.
We are. And that's not something to be taken lightly.
Definitely not. It's a huge responsibility.
It is. And it requires us to think long and hard about the decisions we're making.
And to make those decisions in a way that's transparent, accountable, and inclusive.
You got it. We need to bring everyone to the table. Scientists, policymakers, ethicists, communities.
So everyone has a voice?
Exactly. Because gene drives, they affect us all.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of gene drive technology.
It's a fascinating topic, that's for sure.
It is, and it's clear that there's still a lot to learn, a lot to figure out.
Oh, absolutely. This is just the beginning.
But one thing's for sure, gene drive technology has the potential to change the world.
For better or for worse.
And it's up to us to make sure it's for the better.
Well said. We need to use this technology wisely, ethically, and with a deep respect for the incredible power we're wielding.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the science to the governance to the ethics.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
That's true. But hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this complex and rapidly evolving field.
And maybe even sparked some new questions.
Because the conversation about gene drives, it's just getting started.
And it's a conversation we all need to be part of.
So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Because the future is in our hands.
Thanks for listening.